This little movement right here, which goes from D half diminished over A flat to A fully diminished and back to the one chord, E flat. This is the quintessential sound of Bridge Over Troubled Water, one of my favorite songs of all time by Simon and Garfunkel. It's a kind of fusion between the folk sound that Simon and Garfunkel was so well known for and the up and coming gospel sound that was so prominent in the 1970s. The song makes use of a handful of classic gospel techniques. One of these is where we take a chord and we kind of alternate between it and a chord that's a fourth above it. So E flat to A flat on our one chord. But we actually do this same idea on the four chord as well, where we start on A flat and we alternate with D flat, the chord a fourth higher. And this movement gives us access to the D flat chord, which is not normally in the key of E flat, but it gives us that gospel flavor that we're after. Bridge Over Troubled Water also uses what's called a gospel walk up or walk down, which is just a way of transitioning from one chord to the next by using stepwise motion in the bass. So the bass is going to walk up or down a scale basically, and the chords are going to fill in notes that work with whatever bass note we're playing. Paul Simon originally wrote this song on guitar. It was kind of a spiritual or a hymn for him, and he had Art Garfunkel in mind to sing it. But when they got in the studio, they leaned on the piano player, Larry Knechtel, who had some experience in gospel playing, and this song transformed into a piano accompaniment behind Art Garfunkel singing the melody. So let's take a closer look at the introduction. So as we said, we're here in the key of E flat major, and we're going to start off with some of the most basic chords. Just a one chord, an E flat major that goes to the five chord B flat, and then we end on A flat major. These are just 1, 4, and 5 chords that you would hear in any folk or any gospel song. But this next chord defines the sound for everything that's about to follow. It's an unusual chord. It's D half diminished, which would be a D minor 7 chord, but we have a flat 5. And to anchor that even more, we put the flat 5 in the bass. So this is D half diminished with an A flat on the bottom. The next chord is an A diminished chord, which creates so much tension that we have to move off of it, and we move off of it back to the one chord to E flat, but not before we kind of draw out the tension a little bit more. We milk it, if you will, by making it an E flat suspended chord and then landing on E flat itself. I think what makes this introduction so compelling is the way that the melody and the bass movement work together. Our melody is just a major scale that's starting on the third and it's going down the scale to the fifth. So it starts on G and it goes down E flat major until it lands on B flat. And our bass is moving in the other direction. It's doing this A flat to A natural to B flat movement. I think the combination of this really simple melody line, it's just a descending major scale, with some chromatic movement in the bass. Both of these ideas are easy for our ears to hear and for us to predict where we're going. And then we just fill those in with some interesting harmonic chords and we get this incredible introduction that sets the stage for the rest of the song. Before we jump into the second half of this introduction, I want to invite you to join me on a 7-day jazz soloing challenge. This is a 1-week course that teaches you my beginner method to learning how to play your first jazz solo. The course is completely free, there's no catch. I produced it entirely using funds from the advertising on this YouTube channel, as well as from the financial support that I get from the paid members of the Premium Jazz Library membership. I hope you'll join us. There are hundreds of other people going through the challenge right now, and we would love to have you. Down in the description below is a link to get you started. The second half of this introduction is just as profound as the first half. Let's look at where we left off. We were on an E flat major chord, the one chord, but we had B flat in the bass because our bass line was ascending by a scale. And we're going to continue that motion that we're going to go up to C in the bass, and Larry plays C dominant 7th in the right hand. Notice that this is C dominant 7, not C minor 7. This chord does not belong to the key of E flat. In fact, it has an E natural in it. When we see a dominant 7th like this, we expect it to resolve down a 5th. So in this key, we would expect C dominant 7 to resolve to F minor 7, the 2 chord. But it doesn't. It goes to A flat instead. This is actually not all that strange though. F minor 7 and A flat major have 3 of the same notes in it. The only note that's different is that the F is in the F minor 7 and it's just not there in the A flat major chord. The other thing is the A flat major chord is so comfortable for us. It's our 4 chord in the key. So it doesn't really matter that it's not going down a 5th. It's just taking us from a place of tension and resolving it to someplace comfortable. Now that we're here on the 4 chord on A flat, we're going to do a really common move, which is to go from the 4 major chord to the 4 minor chord, from A flat major to A flat minor. So Adam Neely says this move from 4 major to 4 minor creates a sense of nostalgia or a sense of longing, and I think that that's really appropriate given the lyrics of this song. Now, I'm not the kind of guy that actually pays too much attention to lyrics. My ears are really interested in the harmony and the melody and the story that's being told through the music itself. I don't usually care as much about the story that's being told through the lyric. But this song is different. It's kind of a metaphor for somebody going through a trying time in their life. It speaks about the sacrifices and the perseverance that are required to get through these difficult times. And it gives us inspiration to persevere and continue on that journey. The last time I went through one of these really difficult times, a couple years ago, this song spoke to me directly. I couldn't help but hear the lyrics. It felt like it was written for me. And I know that I'm not alone in that. The reason that this song speaks to so many people is because, in a sense, all of us are connected by our hardships, and we're here to lift up each other. I like that this song reminds me of that. After singing the first 2 verses, Art looks over at Larry on the piano, who takes an interlude, using the same kind of gospel devices and harmonic structure, but he builds the energy up toward a bigger verse 3. So as the story goes, Paul originally only wrote 2 verses for this song. He intended for it to end kind of like a hymn, rather calmly. But while they were in the studio, Roy Haley observed that the song was asking for more. It was asking to be bigger. And a handful of the studio musicians who were there with him backed him up on this. So right there, in the studio, in the thick of it, while the recording is happening, Paul sat down and he wrote a 3rd verse. By the way, those 3 studio musicians who backed him up, this was Larry Knechtel on piano, Joe Osborne on bass, and Hal Blaine on drums. The 3 of them were core members of a kind of secret collective called the Wrecking Crew. And if you heard any song in the 1960s to early 70s that came out of LA, these guys probably played on the record. There's actually a whole video on this channel about the Wrecking Crew where I tell more of their story and I go into some of my favorite songs and recordings that they played on. I'll link to that at the end of this video so you can watch it next. This 3rd and final verse is treated very differently than the first 2. It's to become the climax of the piece. And we do that by adding more instrumentation, more strings, we add in some percussion, and we drench the whole thing in enormous reverb. This huge, thick sound of the 3rd verse was clearly inspired by Phil Spector's Wall of Sound. And these gospel techniques, along with the lyrics, new instrumentation, the production value to create this wall of sound, all of this comes together to create such a monumentally important piece of musical history. One of my favorite songs of all time.